life's gonna be tough from here on out. I never thought she'd be paralyzed from the waist down. That's what happens when she doesn't listen to her in-laws."
I could hear the energetic voice of my mill coming from the landline speaker. One afternoon at my parents' house, holding the receiver in one hand, my mom looked at me with a puzzled expression, clearly not understanding what was being said to her. It seems someone had an accident, and for some reason, she's thrilled about it. The confused mom asked my mill what's going on.
"Well, Susan, what do you mean by it's serious?"
We looked at each other as my mill laughed over the phone. She had lost her husband early and told my husband and me that she had been living alone for a long time and felt lonely. Hence, she suggested we live together with her. Initially, she said she didn't need us to pay for rent or household chores. However, within 2 months, she flipped her stance, saying that was just adult politeness. It's only natural to pay some kind of compensation, leading to repeated arguments. We couldn't fix our relationship after all. I was in a period of going back and forth between my parents' house to carry my belongings as I was moving out of my in-laws' place. My mill, with her nasty personality, had been troubling me every day. Just like when she showered me with mean comments, she blurted out to my mom,
"That's why, my deal. Your silly daughter caused a major accident because the brakes wouldn't work. It's weird, right?"
Shocked, I couldn't help but speak up towards the speaker. "Deal, you mean me, right? I'm fine, though. What accident are you talking about?" "My name is Emily. I'm 35 years old and currently work as a salesperson for luxury accessories in a department store. After graduating from a college, I've been employed at an accessory shop for nearly 15 years. While considered a senior in the workforce, I find joy and fulfillment in keeping up with new trends and catering to customers' needs, working energetically daily. The age range at my workplace is broad, but given we sell women's accessories, the staff is predominantly female. Among them, I was one of the few who were still single. I wanted to get married and had been actively looking for a partner through friends' introductions, but had yet to find the right match by the time I turned 35. Thus, I took the initiative to seek out a marriage counseling service. I earnestly listened to the counselor, sharing my values and lifestyle in detail. Considering whether there was a match, I ended up meeting Harry, an engineer. He was a year older than me, had a good vibe, and the way he listened to me, slightly blushing, left a very good impression. After hitting it off, we went on several dates, gradually getting to know each other better. I sometimes slipped into my sales pitch talk, but as I spoke with him, that stiffness melted away. Over time, Harry would enthusiastically talk about his favorite novels, and I found myself engaging more openly, the complete opposite of how we started. We both agreed that we wouldn't find a better match than we did. Based on our deep trust in each other, we decided to get married. We were looking for a new home close to my husband's family home. His father had passed away early but left behind a significant inheritance, and my mill, Susan, continued to live there alone. Harry had moved out after getting a job and only returned occasionally. It seemed she had been feeling anxious for a long time, and one day, she suggested we move in with her.
Being alone all the time just makes the loneliness accumulate. I'm at an age where I have to worry about illness and injuries, right? Instead of looking for a new place, you don't need to pay rent. So if you're okay with it, why not live here together? It would mean we could spend more time together. Of course, I wouldn't get in the way of a newlywed couple. Could you consider it? Thinking of it as a way to ease my worries.
My impression of my mill from our visit was that she was gentle and modest, saying, "We'll keep our living areas separate, and since I'm not working, I'll take care of the household chores and cleaning." The loneliness of her living alone was palpable, and understandably, neither my husband nor I could dismiss her outright. Moreover, we were thinking about starting infertility treatments because we wanted children in the future. These treatments would require a long time and significant medical expenses. We had planned to cut back on our living expenses for the cost, but living with my in-laws would not only save money but also allow us to save more. This would enable us to approach the treatment more systematically. Thus, we started to think quite positively about living together.
Honestly, it's a wish come true. Rather than living by ourselves in the neighborhood before moving in together, why not start living together now? It'll save us from changing our living style multiple times and wasting money on moving expenses.
That's right. I don't want to see your mother looking so lonely. Moving into my in-laws' house was nerve-wracking due to the mill and deal relationship. However, it seemed like the best solution both financially for us and mentally for my mill. After much discussion, we decided to move in with my mill. Upon hearing our decision, she said, "Thank you, really thank you. Being with family is the greatest happiness," and she cried with joy. We moved our belongings in and smoothly started our new life. However, just a few months later, my mole's attitude had completely changed. One day, she suddenly said to me with a stern face,
"You always come home late. What's going on? You say it's work, but is it really? Retail jobs should end once the customers leave. It doesn't make sense that you're not coming home until this late after the department store closes. Where exactly are you working?"
I was taken aback and lost for words. "And when are you planning to quit?" she continued. I held a responsible position. My job wasn't limited to just sales. There were meetings at the department store and other locations, and it wasn't unusual to work overtime during busy periods. My husband knew it, and he supported me without saying anything when I came home later than him. I was taken aback by the suggestion that I should quit my job and stay at home.
First of all, if you've married into this family, you should devote yourself to the household. How long do you plan to work? This would have been unthinkable in my time. If I had known you were like this, I would not have agreed to have you as my deal.
"Susan, I value my job as well, and Harry and I have decided to support each other and live our lives together. Continuing with our jobs is a choice my husband and I have made." I managed to say this in response, though trembling. However, my mill became even more stern and scoffed at my words.
"A woman working just disrupts the household. You have a responsibility to keep the house in order while my son is away. You should understand that better."
She wouldn't listen to me and kept insisting I quit my job. As her delusions escalated, she started making baseless accusations like, "The reason you're not coming home must be because you're hiding something." So I hurriedly told my husband to mediate. Of course, I had nothing to hide. My husband was shocked by the sudden change in his mother but stepped in to reason with her. Although she looked unsatisfied, it seemed she eventually resigned herself to just complaining about me. However, the snide remarks towards me didn't stop. Far from improving, she suddenly started saying things like,
"Don't you think it's about time you started paying rent?
"But you said at the beginning that we didn't need to pay rent. Just living here would be enough."
Don't you understand that was just a figure of speech adults use? There's such a thing as manners, even among family members. living here for free without feeling any shame. Considering you want to keep your job so much, I thought you were getting paid with great pride, but it seems it's not much after all.
My mill was now going against the initial agreement, suggesting we pay rent, which was completely different from what was promised. Despite the inheritance, my husband and I were covering most of the everyday expenses. It didn't seem like she had any financial troubles. Yet, claiming the initial conditions were just out of consideration put us in a difficult position. Faced with such disrespectful comments, I firmly responded to my mill. We came here under the condition that no rent was needed. But if that's not the case, my husband and I are prepared to leave. Immediately, she turned red-faced, shouting about ingratitude and complaining, not even talking about rent. You don't even pay a gratitude fee. It seemed she wanted to argue that, even if not rent, we should at least pay something as a gesture of gratitude. Being asked to pay a gratitude fee instead of rent didn't change the financial burden on us. Moreover, the amount she proposed was significantly higher than the rent for apartments in the nearby area. When I brought this up with my husband, we decided to give her a certain amount monthly.
She must want some pocket money. Mom has been living alone and managing on her own for so long. If a little whimsy can be solved with money, it should be considered cheap.
It seemed my husband was also frustrated dealing with his mother. Though we didn't agree to the demanded amount, settling on a smaller sum as pocket money temporarily stopped her tirades. Though she was still visibly unsatisfied, this solution seemed to settle one problem. Just when I thought that was over, another incident occurred. Linda, my husband's sister, has returned. Sil had moved out after getting married, but due to certain reasons, she had divorced. One day, suddenly arriving with a large suitcase, she declared, "I'll be living here from today."
It's also sudden, but my husband was cheating. So I slapped the divorce papers on him and left. Don't worry, I've been a housewife for a long time, so I won't be any trouble.
However, she insisted on having a luxurious dinner, suggesting, since it's a special occasion, why not get some beef steak? My mill seemed thrilled to have her daughter back and was clearly on her side. Given that my sister-in-law's ex-husband was a wealthy executive, and she flaunted flashy brand name items, I was worried about her future spending habits. We had met her only a few times during the engagement and wedding. She is 40 years old, 4 years older than me. Due to the slight age difference, we didn't quite hit it off. Moreover, upon learning about my job, she made outrageous requests like, "You must have an employee discount, right? Why don't you get me something for free since we're family?" My husband and I were stunned. After we curtly refused, she glared at me irritably and lost interest, saying, "Oh, I see."
Such an inconsiderate soul. Well, considering your age, I guess Harry was desperate.
With such remarks, my sister-in-law's presence made me increasingly feel at my limit. My mill would complain of back pain and being overworked, leaving all the household chores to me. Even though my Sil, currently unemployed, could have shared the tasks, she refused, claiming, "I'm tired from the divorce drama, and I didn't come back to be put to work." Harry tried to help, but being an engineer, he was often exhausted after a day's work. Eventually, I reached my breaking point. Tears would suddenly stream down my face. Sleepless nights became common, and starting infertility treatment became the least of my worries. The stress led me to consider counseling, as maintaining everyday life became a struggle. Seeing my distressed state, my husband suggested, Let's move out as soon as we can.
It's not right for you to go through this, and we can't keep putting up with my mom and sister. I'm sorry, I should have prioritized you over them.
But we don't have the money for that.
We can't be worrying about costs right now. A most important thing is your health.
He started looking for a new place immediately. However, it was precisely the season for graduations and new school terms, making affordable housing scarce and quickly taken. It seemed like moving out of my in-laws' house would take some time. Meanwhile, my relationship with my Sil didn't improve and only seemed to worsen. As a salesperson, I used somewhat expensive cosmetics and accessories to maintain a professional appearance. My Sil, being unemployed and short on funds, she seemed envious of my belongings. I started noticing items missing or moved. And when confronted, she would nonchalantly confess.
What's the big deal? I like this brand too. It should be okay to borrow a little.
These are my personal belongings. Please don't use them without asking.
Don't make such a fuss over using a lipstick or borrowing a necklace for a day. We're family, so don't get so worked up. Mom, tell your deal she's being too possessive.
Despite multiple warnings, she would bring my Mill into the argument, both ganging up on me with petty complaints. My Mill would sigh in exasperation and scold me, try to be more accommodating. Just because she's your Sil doesn't mean you have to make such a fuss. No improvement was in sight. I put my personal belongings in a locked box so they wouldn't be touched, but eventually she broke the key with a tool. Standing over the shattered remains of the small key, my patience finally snapped. No matter how many times I've pointed it out, nothing changes, and now even my keys are broken. I've had enough. If living together means not respecting each other's belongings, then we can't continue living together. I'm moving out. I declared this to the two of them and started hastily packing my belongings into a large bag. My Mill, furious, followed me around, yelling, "Think it over. You can't endure even that much." But realizing I was not listening, she started making a phone call somewhere. The call was to my family home, unbelievably. Whether my mom picked up the phone or not, I could hear her lodging a complaint. "What kind of upbringing have you given your daughter?" I couldn't catch how my mom responded, but soon after, I got a call.
Was that call just now from your Mill, Harry's mom? She said something really odd. Emily, are you okay? Are things not going well with your Mill?
My mom seemed to get more worried about what my Mill said, but she was furious when I explained the reason. She told me, "Come back home immediately." My husband, upon hearing about the situation later, also suggested, "Once we find a new place, I'll come to pick you up." Encouraged by this, I began to prepare in earnest and left my in-laws' house the next day. Needless to say, none of them came to see me off or tried to stop me. I planned to collect my belongings from my in-laws' house while commuting between my parents' home, my in-laws, and work. A few weeks later, as I was cleaning at my parents' house in the morning before my afternoon shift, the home phone rang. My mom checked and, with a puzzled look, picked up the receiver, saying, "It's your Mill." Watching my mom on the phone, she soon made a strange face and signaled to me. Apparently, my Mill was saying something odd on the phone. When she put it on speaker, a familiar loud voice, sounding quite pleased with herself, burst through.
Life's going to be tough from now on, huh? Who would have thought she'd end up like that?
Well, who exactly is having a tough time? What exactly are you talking about?
So, deal, my deal. What goes around comes around. Your foolish daughter caused a major accident because the brakes failed.
We looked at each other, bewildered. I hadn't caused any accident. In fact, I hadn't even stepped out of my parents' house since this morning. My Mill, even more delighted, kept talking.
And to think she caused a major accident right before going to work. It's her own fault for not quitting. It's really strange, isn't it?
There were too many questionable points, and none of it made sense. I interrupted her tirade, addressing the speaker. Deal, you mean me, right? I'm fine, though. What accident are you talking about?
What? No way. What do you mean?
My Mill was clearly flustered. It was a bizarre claim for a prank call. I pressed for meaning, but she was just panicking. Why are you all right? If it's not your accident, then whose is it? While we were going back and forth, my husband, Harry, appeared at my parents' house, visibly agitated. He rushed over and grabbed my shoulders, checking if I was okay. Then, he showed a relieved smile.
Emily, I'm so glad you're safe.
What's going on? Between your mom and you, what happened? When I asked, Harry suddenly said, my sister was in an accident. Your sister?
I'm just glad Emily wasn't involved. We're heading to the hospital now. Can you come with us?
Hearing that from my husband, I nodded without hesitation. We took the afternoon off work and rushed to the hospital. When we arrived at the hospital, we were told that my Sil was still undergoing treatment, but her life was not in danger and she was fully conscious. My Mill, who was panicking, had also arrived, and we all were immediately relieved by this news. Then, we went back and forth between the hospital and the in-laws' house, preparing what was necessary for Linda's hospital stay until her treatment was completed. When Linda was moved to her hospital room, she was exhausted, lying in bed in a pitiful state. She was able to have a conversation, so my husband went over to her and started to listen to her story.
This morning, when I was getting in the car to go to work, the brakes stopped working on the way and I crashed into a utility pole. I heard no one else was involved, but is that really true?
Yes, it was on a street with no pedestrian traffic, so no one else was caught up in it, but your back is.
We had already heard about the after effects of the injuries from the accident she caused herself. Thanks to quick rescue efforts, Linda managed to survive but had severely injured her back. As a result, she's now paralyzed from the waist down. She can't move her legs or walk, and living on her own is out of the question. And it seems almost certain that this paralysis will remain as a lasting after effect. As the doctors explained this to Linda, she said, I can't believe it, how can this happen? And I'll sue the maintenance company, trying to lash out in tears. But since she could only move her upper body, my husband was easily able to restrain her. Indeed, the brake failure seems like it could only be due to poor maintenance. I suddenly noticed that Susan, my Mill in the corner of the room, had turned pale. Susan, are you okay? Despite the terrible situation, I couldn't harbor any resentment. She looked like she might faint, so I was worried, but Susan didn't say anything even when I spoke to her. Then, my husband asked, do you have any idea about this? His voice was so cold and stern that it surprised me.
I'm asking if you know anything about the car accident.
Susan, blue-faced and shaking, said no, and she shook her head. No matter how many times he asked, the answer was the same. No, I don't know, she denied, but a bad feeling was growing inside me. My husband excused himself to Linda and checked her smartphone. All the family cars are equipped with dash cams, and footage from several weeks can be reviewed through a dedicated app. When he pulled up the data from Linda's car and pressed the play button, we were about to witness something shocking. Isn't this Susan? The lights in the garage turn on, and my Susan appears. I can tell Susan is scrutinizing the inside of the car from across the hood. She seems to be thinking about something, carrying items to the front of my Linda's car and squatting repeatedly. Since the dash cam records video and audio, I can hear sounds of something being dragged and her muttering to herself.
It's tricky, huh? What? It's this heavy. Maybe this way. I'm sure this is the right line.
From the occasional words heard, it's clear she's searching for something by crawling under the car. Suddenly, there's a loud snap. She's cutting something under the car. Both Linda and I immediately understand what she's doing, and we can feel the blood draining from our faces. Confronted with the footage, Susan starts to tremble all over. From her voice in the video, terrifying words can be heard.
This will send that deal straight to hell.
I finally understood her attitude when she called the family home. It seems my Susan was actually hoping I would get into an accident. But it was my Linda, who ended up in the accident. She had mistaken my car for Linda's, but it became clear she had tampered with it herself.
Unbelievable. Mom, what were you planning to do if I had died?
Linda, furious, confronted Susan, who blurted out in panic, "I couldn't tell the cars apart." There was a reason Susan mixed up the cars. As it turns out, Linda and I coincidentally had the same model and color of car. It is a standard black compact. The mix-up came to light the day she moved back in, and we were both quite shocked. Since my parents' home had no parking space, my car was always left at my in-laws. I was planning to leave the house completely, so I left the car when I wasn't using it. It was impossible for us, who regularly used our cars, to mistake them. We each had our designated parking spots in the garage. However, Linda always acted superior to me, choosing whichever spot was more convenient for her at the moment. Despite numerous warnings, she never changed, making it understandable that Susan was confused. I used my car yesterday and upon returning, found Linda's car in my spot. Not wanting to engage, I parked in her spot and went straight to my parents' house. But Susan had no idea about these circumstances. Not being familiar with cars, she unknowingly tampered with it. Linda is sobbing bitterly, blaming her mother. "You're the one at fault for not checking properly." Susan, perhaps panicked, starts to lash out nonsensically.
It's your fault for not parking in the right spot. What are you going to do now that you're in this condition?
What am I going to do? It's my fault. It's not an accident. It's an incident you caused, Mom.
Their shouts fill the hospital, creating a chaotic scene. My husband took me out of the room for a moment, and, given that it was clear Susan had intentionally tampered with the car, called the police. Due to the recentness of the incident, the police arrived quickly to handle the situation. With the dash cam footage and the audio recorded from the moment we entered the hospital room submitted, Susan was taken to the police. Amidst the turmoil and her turning pale, Susan was led away, and Linda, with her eyes swollen from crying, tentatively addressed my husband and me.
We're family, not strangers. You'll take care of Mom in her absence, right?
She subtly inquired about future care, but my husband immediately responded with a firm no. My husband, an engineer who works with cars, glared at Linda, clearly dissatisfied.
The cause of the accident isn't solely on Mom. A warning light should have come on if the brake hose was cut. Plus, if the brake fluid were drained, you'd realize something was off as soon as you pressed the pedal. You should have stopped the car then, instead of forcefully driving it until you got seriously injured. From my point of view, you're the one full of problems.
After cutting her off sharply, he then started showing us a video on his smartphone. It was footage from Linda's dash cam, but the time was different from before. The timestamp showed this morning. It was just as Linda was about to leave for work. Of course, Linda herself was in the footage. She was clearly struggling with a heavy load, trying to pack it into her car. The load looked like a small safe. It looked familiar to me, and I raised my voice. "Isn't that the safe for your watch?" When I exclaimed in surprise, my husband nodded with a stern face. For some reason, Linda was trying to move the expensive watch safe that my husband had been keeping safe. Acting suspiciously and in a hurry, she tried to drive out of the garage after loading the safe into the car without properly checking her surroundings or even fastening her seatbelt. This scene played out right before my eyes, and she looked as pale as my mill had earlier. When my husband demanded an explanation in no uncertain terms, Linda hesitantly started confessing to something outrageous. Initially, she had explained that she was just taking the car out for work, but it turned out she had planned to take the safe with the watch and sell everything. It seems she thought that even though she didn't have the key to the safe, breaking it would suffice. Right after starting the car, she noticed something off with the brakes, but in her rush to get away from the house quickly, she pressed the accelerator, which seems to have led to the accident. Linda cried and tried to explain, but my husband looked down on her disdainfully.
I needed the money right away to pay back my ex-husband. I was just going to borrow a little bit.
Linda had returned home after her divorce, but she had lied then as well. She said she divorced her husband and moved back to her parents' house because he cheated on her, but the truth was the exact opposite. The one who cheated was actually Linda herself. She was sued for damages, lost all her savings, and couldn't afford to live on her own, so she had no choice but to flee back to her parents' house. She didn't want to share the embarrassing story of owing alimony, so to save face, she made her ex-husband out to be the bad guy. Since she's not working after moving back, she's losing sight of how to pay off the unpaid alimony. So, she was getting by selling off expensive items from the house without permission. But there's a limit to everything. Eventually, she set her sights on Harry's luxury watch, leading to this debacle.
Thinking about the alimony stresses me out, but I felt better while bossing around Emily with Mom. That's why I did such a horrible thing. I'm going to change, I promise. Please don't give up on me.
She started saying this in a soft voice as if she was despairing about her future. But when she saw the unimpressed look in my husband's eyes and mine, she seemed to realize she was at a disadvantage. Suddenly, her demeanor changed, and she started shouting, "Don't run away! Support and take care of me," as if her earlier proclamation of change was forgotten. Given her past behavior, such demands were bound to fall on deaf ears.
There's still alimony left to pay. I took that accident for you. Ungrateful wretch, ruining someone's life. You guys should pay the money instead.
My husband and I listened in silence, but as she grew tired, her panting became more and more incoherent. She made such a commotion that several nurses rushed in, prompting my husband and me to leave the room. We nodded to each other, agreeing, never come back. Later, the police conducted inquiries, asking if anyone besides my husband was knowledgeable about cars. What my mill did was nothing short of criminal, and her arrest was inevitable. However, it was still unclear how someone who neither drove nor had any knowledge about cars could come up with the idea to cut the brake hose, let alone how she prepared the tools for it. But neither my husband nor I could think of anyone who fit the bill. A few days later, the investigation revealed a surprising truth. It turned out my mill had been paying a significant amount of money to a young man she met before we got married. The man was a notorious figure who targeted older women, pretending to date them to swindle money. My mill, cutting into her inheritance and living expenses from my fill, poured money into dates with this man. As her savings dwindled and life became harder, she proposed moving in with us, hoping to be supported. Unsatisfied with just that, she attempted to collect money under the guise of rent or gratuity. However, after we repeatedly refused to pay, claiming it was not part of our agreement, she desperately turned to the man for advice. That's when he suggested something dreadful.
If your deal dies, your son, being her husband, would get the insurance money. With that, we could live it up in fancy hotels and have fun every day.
My mill had long been under the young man's influence and, egged on by him, bought the specified tools and carried out his plan. However, the car tampered with was actually the sister-in-law's, leading to this tragedy. The identity of the young man was also uncovered. Though interrogated, he denied everything, saying, "We talked, but it was all jokes, and I didn't tell her what to buy or give any instructions." He also repeated that while he did go on date-like outings with my mill, there was no romantic relationship. She was merely a source of money for him. I wasn't serious, so I wouldn't incite criminal behavior, he claimed. However, the police, suspecting otherwise, discovered evidence that a plan to steal my insurance money from my husband was seriously contemplated. Additionally, the man's other crimes, including extortion against other women, were uncovered. Thus, both he and my mill were arrested. After the trial, the mill received a prison sentence. Lindy apparently contacted her ex-husband to get him to take care of her, but he had already started a new life and hated her, so the conversation ended with him telling her to pay alimony quickly. Linda, who has a rough and selfish personality, started using helpers from welfare services. No matter how much she was warned, she was constantly turned away from private services because she treated the helpers in charge as if they were little servants. And finally, she had no time to choose people. Ultimately, she was assigned a calm helper who would not tolerate her unreasonable demands. Despite her frequent requests for someone warm, with human kindness, no one willing to replace the efficient but cold helper appeared. The assignment became permanent. My life also saw changes. This incident had greatly worried my parents, so I requested a transfer to a location closer to my home. The request was approved, and I happily started working near my family. Feeling uncomfortable living near his in-laws' town, my husband successfully found a new job and we decided to move closer to my parents' home. It's a fresh start for us in a new place, but he's always considerate, saying he wants to make up for the trouble caused and always tries his best. The watch that was stolen by Linda was held by the police for the investigation but was eventually returned to him. Due to the impact of the accident, the safe it was stored in was damaged. Some of the watches inside were broken, but my husband said, Let's make these a keepsake for the whole family, as he decided to cut ties with his family. Both of us have started to get used to the new environment. Now, we are in the process of choosing a hospital to start the fertility treatments we had originally planned for.